good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome in to another T360 webinar. I'm Clint Skutchan. I oversee our organized real estate division. We work with MLSs and associations around the country, and pleased to have joining me today Katie Schatz. Katie is the newest member of our team. So welcome, Katie, and first full-fledged T360 webinar. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really glad to be here and hello to everybody.
Get to introduce you to the broader audience. You've been here for about a month, and so you've been meeting folks as we go, including at our data summit, which we had in New Orleans last week. So we certainly are excited to be able to introduce you to the audience. For those maybe who haven't bumped into you before, just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump in. We're just waiting for folks to kind of come in on the LinkedIn Live and elsewhere. So doing these intros, and then we'll jump into the presentation itself. But yeah, tell us a little bit about where you come
Sure.
from and your background, Katie.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, I started in 2008 at the Memphis Area Association of Realtors, and I ended about 6 weeks ago at the Memphis Area Association of Realtors. But between, I spent some time in Florida, and I do want to tell all my Florida friends I'm flying my Florida flag today, and my heart is going out to all of you. I lived in St. Pete, and this thing is headed straight to Tampa, St. Pete, Sarasota. So I'm definitely thinking about all y'all. But I was at a very small association with an MLS in Florida, and also a very large association, part of a regional MLS in Florida. And then in Memphis, we were a medium size that ran our own MLS. So over the past 15 years, lots of different experiences as a AE and staff member, and really glad to be on board at T3.
Yeah, we're very glad to have you. So, well, I think we're up and running now on the LinkedIn Live, so we're going to jump in. Just a note for those who are joining us direct on the Zoom webinar, we've got the Q&A open in the chat. If you want to put comments, chat amongst yourselves in there, you're certainly welcome to do so. LinkedIn folks, if you want to post some things on there, we can follow up after the event if there's any questions or clarifications we need to give you for those questions or items that are posted there. So feel free to chat away, put your questions up as we get going through, but we're going to jump in here and get going. So we hosted what was our inaugural T3 Data Summit. It was in conjunction with the T3 Technologies Summit that was hosted in New Orleans this past week. It's an invitation-only event, a small event, but specifically because it's not necessarily a typical conference. There's not a lot of talking at you from the stage. It's a blend of presentations and panelists and then room conversations. And so we're going to give you a recap here of this event. Had about 80 people in attendance, a number of folks who, and yeah, certainly thinking about Florida and others who have been hit with all these storms over the last few weeks, but a number of folks weren't able to join us in person for that event. But the event itself, really, we had a goal to identify some actionable data opportunities and solutions just so that we could share with the industry and, of course, with our clients. So we're going to walk you through this iterative process. We did a pre-conference survey that mimicked the program itself. So we'll share some of those survey results as well as sharing back what the event itself looked like and felt like. And we started with foundations. And one of the foundational elements when you're talking about real estate data is this amalgamous thing. It means something to anyone who you ask is like, oh, what does this mean to you? Well, it's really relative to your position and what you know and what you haven't done about it with the data. So we talked about, what is real estate data and how much do we really know about it? It's always talked about, oh, the data, the data, the data. Well, what is it and what do we know about it? So we started with just a general question. We talked about this throughout the conference and had kind of different iterations of this, but going into the conference, we said, when you hear the term real estate data, what comes to mind? And what we found was, kind of some free thinking, the fragmentation, the complexity of this topic became a very salient point, not only for the pre-conference survey, but the comments themselves that we had during the conference. There's a recognition here that there is still this cornerstone element to the MLS data itself. And as we've seen, compensation come out of the value proposition and kind of that core value set of the MLS, we're seeing more and more folks leaning into that collaboration piece. And a lot of that is around the data and the collective set of data and what can be done with that. The actionability and usability is something that was certainly talked about, and in particular, moving towards, this idea of, if we use it, how can we not only leverage it for intelligent purposes, but help it to use that as a diversification of revenue, not only for the MLS environment, potentially for also the brokerage environment as well. We talked about involving data, beyond just the listing and moving from, and I think this is a challenge for us as an industry, we tend to think real estate data transactional only, and we don't think about the broader socioeconomic context, the consumer insights that can be gathered. And so that's a key piece that we addressed throughout. And in particular, our keynotes, who were outside of industry folks, came in and talked a little bit about this. And again, that need for that accuracy and real-time data. Katie, any kind of setup or any follow-up in terms of, what data means to different people? I know you had some observations from our time in New Orleans.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm looking at my notes over here, so sorry if I keep looking away. But yeah, it was very interesting. We will go into a little bit about what our panelists talked about, but just thinking about what it means to a broker versus as a association or MLS exec is a completely different animal. So that's something, even sounds very basic saying it now, but a lot of people don't think that way. We aren't trained to think that way. So that was interesting.
Yeah. Not part of our day to day. Well, of
Mhm.
course, we're strategy folks here at T360, and so we wanted to start at the highest level beyond just what do you think about real estate data, like how strategic are you being about this? And so we asked the question: does your organization have a documented data strategy? And what you can see here is a significant number of folks said yes, but it's largely embedded in our overall strategic plan that we might have for our brokerage or for our association. In terms of standalone, the brokers actually had a higher percentage of those who have a standalone data related strategy. And a lot of that is because of, how they utilize it to
Mhm.
engage their customers, their clients, their agents. But this is something that we've been talking with our clients, is that more and more, if we want to be data oriented companies, and we feel like we are in the MLS environment in particular, we have to have a clear strategy around that. And that means understanding, what are your core competencies against data? What is your vision for that, as well as what are your actionable items? And so we really want to start to see more of the folks who are moving into this, standalone capacity rather than just data is mentioned in our plan. It's kind of like the idea of when you have an association MLS blended plan. It's like, oh yeah, we have an MLS strategic plan, but it's in our association plan. You're like, well, then you don't have an MLS plan. And so that's
Right.
similar around the data strategy. That follow up
Yeah,
on that
I
one.
think
Yeah.
it's interesting too that the brokers might actually be utilizing their data better than the MLSs. So there's a collaborative piece there that we can kind of, I think, learn from them on the association MLS side, some ways that they're leveraging it that maybe we haven't thought of on the staff
Yeah,
side.
well, historically, I mean, MLS data has largely gone into a data moat and sat there stagnant for,
Hmm.
just so,
Yep.
sitting there with really no tapping into it whatsoever. And so, yeah, this is
Hmm.
that moment in time because of, and we'll talk more about this. We think there's a significant degree of urgency around figuring out data utilization, and ultimately monetization strategies as organized real estate and brokers. Because if we don't do that now, Katie, like we're getting a strong sense that there are others outside of industry who have enough and momentum built around their use of data and intelligence engagement with the consumers that they could be coming to us with answers rather than to us as the fiduciaries taking care of
Yep.
that for ourselves.
So 86 billion with a B dollars in real estate transactions in 2023. So think about how many transactions that is. And of course, the brokers and agents are involved in all of that. More so maybe than the MLS and all the ancillary products and services and CRMs and whatever they're using at the office firm level. But that's the value of the transactions, and the data is how much is the data worth? And you'll get into that a
Yeah.
little bit more, but that opportunity there, we're not the only ones who see that, to your point, right? Others looking in at our industry are like, there's something big there.
Well, yeah, they see it as the central point of wealth, right? And wealth
Mhm.
movement and then acquisition and expenditures against the housing purchase. So there's again more than just what that singular transactional data set means to the socioeconomic aspects, and something we focus on and talk a lot about. Again, understanding data. So do you have a strategy, and do you know how much it costs to deliver your data and manage it? And this is some research work that we've been working on now for about a year and a half, and it's a complex and layered question of what are your annual expenses incurred. And we asked this of the attendees, again, very forward-thinking, data-minded brokerages and MLSs, and 60% here of the MLSs are saying, I have an estimated amount. We've got another 33% of the brokers are saying, I've got an estimated amount. To me, I could move those folks in the yes estimated into the unsure category, and we really only have a slight percentage overall, and then in each instance against brokerage and MLS, who understand how much is it costing. And so as we move into this idea of recouping costs or generating ancillary revenue from the use of data, I think it helps if we understand how much it costs to be able to explain, hey, we at least have to be able to cover our costs to manage and distribute this data in order for it to be valuable for you at an amalgamated level where there's intelligence and information there beyond just the individual data points. On the flip side of this, then we said, well, okay, well, if you don't know how much it costs, are you aware of how much revenue you're generating? And again, an overwhelming amount of folks in the MLS space in particular, like, we have an estimated amount. And in most instances, those estimated amounts are against your data feeds. And what we would say, is that there's a lot of exhaust revenue opportunities here, again, against the cost considerations that we know, and from some of our initial research, about 45% of MLSs aren't even realizing revenue against their feed capacities. Many of these things they're delivering for free, which then those feeds are being iterated on, and revenues being generated, whether it be through brokerage outputs or in particular technology outputs. And so we're basically doing all this work, putting all this together. There are cost considerations for it, and then there's no fee realization against the utilization, and people are taking in. And in some instances, we've done research where individual companies are realizing twice the amount of gross revenue as all MLSs combined, and much of this is on the back of the data feeds that are being provided. So this is an interesting one to me, and I know you had a couple of thoughts on this one too.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, again, thinking about other people who would look at our industry and say, well, there's a giant opportunity there, right? Like, we're missing something here. And so I think there's that. But also just the juxtaposition between understanding the revenue and the expenses isn't even the same. So I think that's kind of fascinating. But and then also, we talked about this too, Clint, like there are the hard costs, but then there are some soft costs associated with it as well. And, like staffing, for example, but you also just mentioned something like, how do you put a value on that? How it's reiterated over and over by others, like even though that might not, it doesn't cost you anything, but how could you see revenue from that? Like, how would you value that? So there's a lot of potential there as well, I think.
Absolutely. Continued in our journey through our on-site as well as the survey was, let's get some foundations. And we noted this a moment ago. What are folks doing outside of industry? We get really insular in our understanding and use of and what is real estate data and what is the potential. And so we invited in, and we actually set the kind of cadence for our on-site data summit by bringing in a couple of outside folks, although they have connectivity to real estate, so they had some understanding of it. They weren't completely foreign to this space. We had Rob Wolf and Brad Clayton from Clayton Wolf who presented, and their focus was really around looking at data and understanding that it tells a story. And so this was kind of an important piece. And beyond that, just looking at data as being more than just numbers and stuff, but rather true observations, and observations that could lead to insights and value, and beyond just value of potential revenue, but value in terms of betterment, in terms of what you do to better serve folks that you work on behalf, or that you're serving. And I know this was a big point for you, Katie.
Yeah, it was so basic. It was Rob Wolf's Data 101. What is data? It's an observation. You have one observation. You have one data point. So if that's one data point, how many millions of billions of possibly trillions of data points do we have in our industry. So it's huge, but when you break it down, I think, we went into, and you'll get into this, defining data, but at its core, it's any observation. So I thought that was super interesting, and it kind of opens your mind a little to, we think of data in different ways, but there are probably some other things that we haven't even considered to be data that are to others.
And behavioral aspects. And so what was neat is Rob had worked through his past work. He's worked with Nielsen and a number of others who really use intelligence to better understand consumer behaviors. He also was engaged by the Kroger Group during some of his consultative work. And what you're seeing here is a heat map as well as just an activity-based map of how folks were going into grocery stores and shopping. And there's this long-standing, and this was the point they made, is like there's what we think we know, and then there's what the data tells us. And so they were charged with going in and understanding what were shopping behaviors. And of course, men were very efficient and got out of their shopping much quicker,
Mm-hmm.
even if they purchased the same things. Right, Katie? We can all agree men are much more efficient.
No, no. I didn't see his trip as that efficient. The
The men
woman's
wandered,
trip,
actually. They went
well,
back and forth and all over, but they
yeah,
they moved quickly,
to
I think
set the
was the
stage, there was a tracking device on a female and a tracking device on well, not just like a whole bunch of people, females and males, and men and women shop differently. So that was a fact that came out
we
of
all
this
know that. Like if you've shopped with
study,
your
but
significant other, you know these things,
correct.
right?
Yeah, or just have you ever been in a grocery store and looked at people how they shop? But yeah, it was very interesting, and it was this idea of, I think, intentionality for the women. They went through the grocery store, and this is actually a map of a woman going through a grocery store, goes through, very intentionally, knows what's on her list. Her list is probably in order. That's what I do because I'm a total nerd of where I'm going. And then the man was very circumstantial, like, I want beer, and then just like randomly goes down an aisle, like, what looks good, and then randomly wanders off to another area of the store that he doesn't even need anything from. So
Even when they were
it,
doing different activities, though, you can see from the heat map, they all ended up almost going to the exact same places. And they did, in this
yeah,
case, they were comparing truly apples and oranges to apples and oranges. They purchased the same things.
yes.
But again, they eradicated a number of assumptions of, how people shop. This long-standing idea that the longer people there, the more money they spend. They actually were able to demonstrate that most of their spending occurs early on. And so they just use this to demonstrate how behavioral activities can tell us about consumer interests and intent. And Brad Clayton then came in and talked about how they're translating this kind of into the real estate environment, and by looking at activities related to the way in which folks are touring homes when they go into an open house. Where are they spending their time? Do they linger here? Do they linger there? And so then they're translating this into, and again, where if we broaden our understanding of what real estate data is, it can be consumer-based behaviors that the MLS and the brokerage could be the purveyors of. Instead of looking outward to say, well, what are consumer groups and others telling us about consumer behavior? We can gather this intelligence from our own insights as practitioners and as MLS executives. So this was interesting, just they looked at that and they were able to kind of look at different segments of how people are dealing with an open house, from, of course, the looky-loos, the nosy neighbors, down to the circumstantially driven, and those folks that are ready, aim, they're all over the place to earn internal
Mhm.
driven. They're early on in this work, and they're looking for MLS partners, by the way, to learn more about these and other kind of consumer behaviors. But they're interested in trying to be more intentional about some of the data that we're collecting. So it was just a great insight and a reset to say some folks look at our industry differently, and there's a lot of information to be gleaned. We continued our foundational travel. Oh, go ahead, Kate, before I jump on.
No, no, I was just going to say it was fascinating, and it was really fun as well. But the question, in that open house map, and trying to think about how to use our data there, is everybody wants to know, when is somebody going to buy a house? Like, when is the person, right there, going to wake up and go, oh, I need to buy a new house today? And it could be that we have the means to figure that out and determine that. And beyond that, many other things. If that say 3 agents or have people competing for the same house. One obviously wins, the other two are now looking for something similar that could trigger someone who has a nearby listing to get two leads for, that these other two agents have someone. So it's really fascinating to think about it from that perspective.
Yeah, and one of those opportunities that we'll show you here in a moment is we're at T3 going to be, as a part of this year's trends report, creating a real estate data landscape. So again, we can move from what do we think we know about it to what is the true landscape and how did all those things interconnect. But one of the early observations that Jack Miller shared with our audience was that one of those opportunities is about the idea of consumer shopping behaviors, and that's exactly
Mhm.
what they were alluding to, and they kind of compared it to whale watching, right? Like you wait,
Yeah,
and then they surface. And so, knowing
yeah.
what's going on below the surface is important. Another one of those foundational kind of below the surface but critical elements is about data rights and usage. This has become far more of a, I think, topical conversation right now as it relates to, some of the things that we've read about coming out of the Denver metro area with RE Colorado and some changes to their data rights usage. We talked about this at the event. The CCP conversation has some of these pieces to it. And so we talked a little bit about this and again, surveyed our folks coming into this and asked about this idea of support for utilizing and retaining those rights to real estate data, including for derivative and revenue generating products. And what you can see here is, it scales down and from the strong levels of support for the MLS down into the tech companies kind of coming in at the bottom in terms of that strong support. General support kind of increases as you go down here, but this was across all of our attendees, brokers, MLSs alike. One of the things then we asked about from that is of course, this idea of we move from rights and retainment to then revenue generation. And so we asked about levels of support for revenue generation for aggregated real estate data from each of these kind of use cases. And what was interesting here is there's the numbers overall, but you can really see differentiation in terms of how our broker attendees and MLS attendees are viewing this idea of revenue generation. And it's really interesting to me in particular in that there's such a low level of support versus from the brokers versus the MLS as it relates to GSEs and the utilization of data, the financial institutions, which frankly, these are the ones that have been occurring. And there's been
Mhm.
revenue realization outside of the brokers and the MLSs seeing that come back. So this is kind of the impetus for the RE distribute model where the MLSs are engaging in some of these activities. But beyond that, then there was more support around predictive behavior, especially about brokers and agents, as we would hear about at our conference. And then the idea of the AVMs, the market reports. This is, again, we start to get more to that transactional level and we start to have a little more level of support for that. But thought it was really interesting to see how the brokers viewed this idea of revenue generation versus the way the MLS has viewed it.
Yeah, and maybe part of that is just their day to day, right? That's what they know day to day is the products that they're in versus the MLSs who also understand like their day to day, but it's different. Like we already know that it's going to financial institutions and GSEs. So
Yeah. Well, then the question is, okay, well, what if we have, this is being a reciprocity based model. And so there's a share back revenue sharing model. Does that change the level of support? What we saw is that, we do see a shift. And even from the MLS folks, where they start to feel more comforted that if we're not just taking this and, we're building our revenue opportunities on the backs of the consumers' data that's provided to us by their fiduciaries, the brokers. So there's an increase in support when we have those reciprocity-based models. And I would guess that a lot of those that said this no impact, they were already thinking when we asked that question, yeah, obviously this is the model we have to apply. But I think we do think about reciprocity as a broker-based consideration only. But one of the outputs that we'll get to in terms of, actionable items is we do have to think long-term against this. If we are realizing revenue against individuals' data, in other words, the homeowners' data, at some point we have to give consideration to the consumer capacity and their buy-in for these types of activities if they're not a part of that reciprocity-based system. We move beyond that now into this, what foundational and this general concepts into now we want to talk about the T3 data landscape and the opportunities associated with this. We had Jack Miller on site and he in particular, I love he shared this. This is his mind mapping. And if you've met Jack, I feel like this is what every day is like for him. It's just all these different bubbles of different things. But
this
this
is
is his,
how he decides what to eat for breakfast and
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. although many folks on our team probably are this way, but you'll start
Yeah.
to see some of this outlaid and designed intentionally and shared back as a part of, as we mentioned, the T3 trends. We're going to do this T3 data landscape, and then we're going to build off of that with some research activities that we have planned for the upcoming year. But the interconnectivity here of all these different pieces and all the different aspects that go into it, I think the idea of these all being interconnected circles really, really important, because if you move from understanding it to understanding or looking at what the opportunities are, now these were those which Jack and the team are already kind of starting to look at as a part of this landscape. But the consumer behavior, we already talked about this, the direct versus
Mhm.
indirect intelligence about what are they looking at? What does their shopping activity look like? Search preferences and online viewing activity. This is something that we're very bullish on. We think that the consumer search experience is about to go through another evolution with the large language models, the idea of this voice and visual singularity where I can talk to a device and it shows me what I asked for, not based on just drop downs or specific bedrooms or whatever, but rather lifestyle, what I'm looking for in my experience. This was something that was brought up at the first day on our panel, and we had a panel that was talking about what is real estate data and what's the real estate marketplace look like. We had a MLS representative, Cameron Payne. We had a brokerage representative, Lacey Conway. We had Dan Troop, who's with the Broker Public Portal in place of Amy Gorse, who couldn't join us from RE Distribute. And then we had Prem Luthra from our team, who works with these private equity folks. And of course, there's been this percolation of interest now in the MLS space around private equity, again, with the activities in the Denver metro marketplace. And he's hearing from private equity folks that are now looking in on this real estate marketplace and the data and saying, hey, maybe that's something we're interested in. But what came up out of that panel was this idea of lockbox data being so hidden away or kept in these environments that aren't helping the industry as a whole to use this indicator data to better understand the buyer needs, the buyer experience, the coming marketplace. So that was highlighted as an opportunity here. And then agent activities, again, something that became a very clear item that repeated itself throughout the 2 days in New Orleans, and an item
Mhm.
that you'll see coming back in towards the end. But these opportunities link into the possibilities. So this is a great exercise. We had the room do this exercise. We think this is a great exercise for those who are trying to understand data and its utilization more directly, whether you be a brokerage or an MLS or technology company elsewise. If we had blank data, we could do what with it? And I think this is really that sitting down and trying to take, this all these opportunities and to distill it down to it based on our positioning in the marketplace. What do we really have? What might we want to get, and what could we do with it, Katie? So this was a powerful one, and it led to great conversations in the room that ultimately are going to get to some of these outputs that we have for action items.
Yeah, definitely. And it was interesting because we had, gosh, 7 or 8 different tables, I think, and several of them came up with the same kind of thoughts on this, which was really fascinating. But that was one of the things I talked about earlier with that transaction, and how can you give the leads to this other agent over there, and all the possibilities that could happen really almost in real time if we could figure out how to use this data. So lots of
Yeah.
powerful.
I think some of that common mind set and thinking of these breakout groups came back to what we just alluded to on that last one, which is better understanding agent activities. And what really I think was driving that is it's still related to the transaction, so we know it, we understand it, it's tangible. But in particular, I think everybody in that room is really curious about all the business practice changes that we're going through and trying to
Mhm.
understand early on, what are successful agents in this new environment doing or not doing versus what
Mhm.
others are focusing on who aren't succeeding. And so this again is this indicator of there's an opportunity here, and it's a beneficial opportunity for MLSs and brokerages and agents and technology providers, all those who are trying to understand this new business environment of what activities equate to what level of success. Are there any behavioral aspects that then again become those intelligence insights that we want to glean from these sets of data, and how can we do a better job of providing those real time, as you pointed out?
There's also this bridge that it creates between, at least, say, let's start with the broker and the MLS, but it goes, even to the agent and then up to the technology companies. But that it's a symbiotic, it creates a symbiotic relationship that isn't maybe there right now, that it's, the MLS can provide things back to the broker that would be helpful, and then that helps them make their agents successful. But then you're also going the other way as well, with the broker maybe saying, yeah, and because we had this insight, then our agents were able to sell faster or at a higher price point or whatever the deal is. So I
Yeah, and
think there's
the
some
agents themselves
symbiosis
become
there.
better informed. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And especially there's symbiotic things that we do in the industry, but we maybe haven't found that one kind of cogent thing to really jumpstart our collaborative work towards data utilization and even some of the monetization pieces. Ultimately, there's the technology, and it's really never been the technology that's been the primary reason we've been held back. It has largely been some of our own mindsets, some of our politics. And so we
Mm-hmm.
really went after this with three presentations from our T3 team. I was fortunate enough to present on the organized real estate mindset. We had Derek Taylor from our technology group who presented, and he's dove in on AI. I mean, he's went to take some university classes, all these different things. But he's also someone that spent time as a broker who sat on an MLS board, and so he understands this. And then we had Nick Bailey, who just joined our team, talking about the brokerage mindset, because there is an alignment of mindset that we have to get towards here if we're going to advance and see the opportunities. And I loved how Derek Taylor framed this, because this gets back to something that we talk about in terms of organized real estate. Organized real estate and the MLS environment in particular has demonstrated a fiduciary capacity to the marketplace and consumers that no private interest group, I don't think, would have done. I think, because of the importance of this, the value, frankly, that we're not extracting, if it were in a privately
Mm-hmm.
held environment, it would have been broken into pieces and it wouldn't have had as much of this importance. And so he went back to, again, realtor terminology of, the under all is the land. But he brought that forward and said, if we're moving forward and we are going to, enable the usage of all this intelligence and data in the real estate marketplace, we should, as an industry, step forward and say, we've got that same doctrine as it relates to the data itself. And you can see here, under all is the data. Upon its wise utilization and equitable access depends the survival and growth of innovation and our technological advancement. I love that, because it's saying here, these aren't just data points, but there is a real fiduciary aspect here. There is a greater good concept, and we as an industry are well positioned to take advantage of that.
Absolutely. It's a fiduciary. And what I heard from everyone in the room, or felt maybe, is it's truly a caring. It's uh, I mean, we all really care about this, and we want the right things to happen with the data. I mean, I think maybe one of the reasons we've been so protective of it is because of that, because we don't want it to be um, used in the wrong way, or whatever. So that was something else that I really took away, was everybody, you could really feel that people just, there's such a caring, and that's across our industry.
And for me, I wanted to share this mindset. And for those that have worked with us, you've seen this before. This is a light emissions map. And to me, this is a visual demonstration of natural marketplaces, the continuum of commercial, residential housing, whatever it is. There's real estate that underpins this. And it's something that we talked about in this idea of having more of a marketplace mindset rather than just a service area or a chartered territory concept. And when you overlay the top 20 MLSs that serve over 50% of subscribers, it's not surprising that they're overlaid against these continuous marketplaces. And most of these, as you look at them, are constructed in a regional manner because they're serving regionalized communities. This is another mapping item that we share with our clients. Again, trying to get towards that, we have to serve the marketplace mindset, and the consumers are telling us where these marketplaces are. This is from the census data called the common statistical area. There are 172 of these, which is my new trick question when someone says, how many MLSs should there be? And I go to 172, because our MLSs do have local marketplace connectivity that they have to retain and uphold. Yet we need to get to a level of a single database that's interconnected. And I think this is a reasonable way to construct that, is through these natural areas where there's economic overlap. So in other words, these 172 areas are defined by folks where they live, work, and play. And I know I live in one of these regional areas. It doesn't matter where the city ends or where the county starts. It's that we have a natural marketplace. Then those natural marketplaces, as I just noted, can be easily connected. In fact, already are, because this is mapping of broadband across the country. And interestingly enough, when we really interconnect those items, it just goes to show that our data as a single set of data, I don't, for me, the number of MLS organizations less concerning than the disparate sets of data. And right now we have 520 plus sets of data, and that's causing all sorts of rankles, which really we'll get to here in a moment. But Nick Bailey talked about how much data is out there. He used the forewarn app to just demonstrate how quickly you can learn about it. One of our attendees was nice enough to share their information, and we learned what kind of cars they owned and when and homes they lived in, and all this information, and this idea that, as you talked about, we're protecting this and we can't let the information out. Well, a lot of the information is already out there. So again, back to this idea, we either try and hold it and love it and squeeze it to death, or we can use it in a constrained and responsible manner. So we think it's really important that the mindset here is as right as the actual technology initiatives. And so this idea that data monetization and the value that we possess, yes, it is okay to utilize this. And we are the group that's best positioned for this. Overcoming the fear of leading and learning from setbacks. We need to learn to lead in this instance, and we're going to make some mistakes along the way. But we have to get out there. We'll get into this in a moment in terms of, again, the outputs. But there was a lot of conversation of, well, we don't know how to value the data. And some of that is, well, we've just got to get it out there and recorrect and learn as we go. And we keep saying, well, we don't have this or we don't know it, and we're fearful of going out to it without all the understanding of it. This is the marketplace that we're operating in a technology and data environment. They rarely know exactly what it's going to be when they launch it. They put it out there and they iterate and they let it find a life of its own. This is a really important mindset. And as was pointed out by Nick, we've got to move from this data control to a data utilization mindset. And Katie, I think this was something that was really important for you and we started with today, is that when we engage with our clients, we're trying to get them to a level of urgency because we think it's a time where we have to act with urgency if we are to be a part of the solution, rather than simply reacting to or responding to others' idea of what that solution looks like.
For sure. And you just said it also, like taking that leadership stance. I think we've kind of, because it's not our maybe main way we think about our business on the running an MLS side, is like we haven't thought about it as a business for a while, but we're a lot of us are getting there, some aren't. But again, others in the tech industry do. And Nick had a great point about all these different tech companies that bought things in our sphere and failed because it isn't their core business. So we are the ones who are best equipped to do it. We just need to have the confidence and take the leadership to just figure it out on our own, like to your point with the valuation, instead of asking, well, gosh, we aren't doing it because we don't know how much it's worth. Well, you've got to start somewhere, or someone else is going to do it for you. So,
and a lot of the valuation is not up to us and how we feel about it. It is about what the marketplace will yield, right?
which is so ironic, because isn't that real estate? You only know, if you don't have comps, how do you know what a house is going to sell for? It's whatever the market will bear. So we know this concept.
Yeah. So these were kind of derived again from our survey mechanism, but were validated throughout our conversations over the course of the 2 days in terms of what are those kind of primary opportunities and challenges. Look, the consistency and standardization, we have the bones for that, but actuating it and doing away with the fragmentation in the data environment that we have and the duplication of systems, the security, the compliance and privacy. Yes, absolutely. And one of the core pieces of having valuable data is that it's clean, it's timely, it's accurate. And so this piece is really important. And also this idea of, preventing the free riders out there that are scraping the data now. How can we bring it back in? Again, an underpinning of the already distribute model is not only to realize revenue, but to be more clear about solidifying the securitization of the data that it is out there. And it's crazy. We had several MLSs that said, well, once the listing's out there on the internet, it's so hard to pull back. think about once it's
Hmm.
embedded in these large language models, it's now near impossible. So a lot of that has to be thought about upfront rather than after the fact. And this relates to the integrity of the data, the idea of interoperability and data collaboration. Again, there's some technical piece here, but it is also back to that. We've got to get on the same page and find ways to work together collaboratively as brokers, as agents, as consumers, as MLS leaders. And then, of course, you can't have a conference now, especially one related to data, where you don't talk a lot about AI's integration, some of those future opportunities, and embracing that mindset of opportunity versus fear, again, was important. And then ultimately getting around to that value recognition and the monetization, even breaking that up into, what's the role of the MLS in this? What's the role of the broker? How do we get to some of these reciprocity-based models? Which leads us to kind of our calls to action, which is what we were trying to work towards with the event and want to share with you all here today, which is back in terms of what are some of those things that we think are calls to action now that we should be thinking with some degree of urgency against. And so again, leveraging those unified standards, bringing the disparate data into a more of a singularity. And we know of a number of initiatives that are working towards this, whether they be MLS driven or brokerage driven. This one's one that came up throughout, and I think this is so core. We know about the data standards. It's a lot of us going out and doing and acting. This last one is about or second one I should say is about informing. The idea of the data rights themselves. This becomes a complicating factor, as we talked about in the room. It quickly goes from black and white to all the grays. But
Yeah.
communications that we got back from our groups and the breakouts, and I think it was Grady from Remax who really put it into this terminology of a clear chain of custody, understanding how the rights of the data change from when the consumer gives it to the broker enters it into the MLS aggregates it, and then it gets kicked back out into the brokerage and technology environment, all this. I loved this concept, and I think it starts to simplify it and put it into a way in which we can all start to have rational conversations around this limiting factor in terms of data usage, which is who has the right to do what.
I loved this. I put it in caps in my notes because I thought it was such a great way to visualize this. I never heard it called chain of custody, which also is speaks to that fiduciary, right? But it's it's even like I'll go one step further, the customer to the agent, to the broker who actually owns the listing, to the MLS, to all the other things that it goes out to, and then back to the consumer, maybe. I mean, these were the questions we had, but the question that started it was who owns the data, quote unquote. So it was such a great conversation, and I think, yeah, it was Grady, and that was such a great terminology that he used, and it also reflects back on that idea that we've all got to collaborate in order for something to work, because there are all these different people involved, and then Clint, you said this earlier, and then maybe we do owe the consumer something in the end because they've contributed to this whole data landscape.
Yeah. The only term I might overlay over it rather than custody, even though custody has a very significant meaning to it, would be stewardship. Because
Yeah.
custody tends to be like me, I'm in control versus stewardship is
Yeah.
I'm in. So that might be the only overlay I would have against that. But I think it's a necessary way of approaching this. And we alluded to this a moment ago, but the idea of creating a real estate data valuation model and moving these more into a unit or metric based approach. I mean, if you look again outside of real estate, you look at data utilization, monetization, all these things. I mean, obviously, all these LLMs, the AI environment is predicated on data and data flow, and they're breaking it up into unit size. And so we've got to start to think in those terms. And I know it's foreign to us, but I think in order for us to get to a model where we can really understand it, not only the utilization of it, but again, the cost considerations to develop those metrics and those unit items. We need to start to think that through. Moving towards those predictive consumer behavior insights and really leaning into this. And one of the things that came out of this was, again, this insulary approach that maybe we've seen in our industry around lockbox usage and data in particular. And look, I don't want to disrupt, private businesses. I know there's competition there, but I do think there are ways to incentivize greater interoperability of those data sets and then more transparent usage and sharing of that data for the greater good of the industry. Because again, if we as an industry are harmed and hampered from continuing growth, or we see impacts that are negative on us, it's going to have real negative impacts on these folks and their clientele. So again, thinking not just about the immediacy, but long-term value propositions here. Collaborate on the agent activity intelligence. This was the one that, again, we talked about, that you alluded to, has so much of a symbiotic feel to it. It feels like there's some momentum that could be placed against this. And again, especially in a very changing environment where we're all, I think, trying to understand what tomorrow means based on what we learned today. So that's really a big piece of this. And then finally, that robust and fair monetization strategy. The reciprocity-based revenue, I think, is the way to go here. If we're going to get buy-in and folks are going to, be willing to and understand that they have different custodial pieces to this. And as we talked about, I think we've got to think long-term, not just about the robust and fair approach for the practitioners and us as organized real estate leaders, but as those folks that are a participant in this too, the consumers, the technology partners. And so those are our actionable items that came out of this, Katie. I felt good about where we got to, but of course that only goes so far as, great, they look good on paper. What can we do about it moving forward? And so we're here. We're going to carry these forward, these items forward with our clients. We're going to share with the industry through the data landscape that you'll see in the trends report. We've got the opportunities report that'll be coming out later this month that we've been working on, Stefan in particular, talking to brokerage, talking to all the real estate leaders in the country. And out of that, there's a number of data related opportunities. And so that urgency that we were trying to instill in others, I think we have it as a company, and we're trying to make sure that urgency is being delivered in the products and items that we're delivering back to our clients in the industry as a whole. So with that, I don't know if you have any kind of parting thoughts here,
Just
Katie.
last thought is, now more than ever, we need strong, capable leadership, and that's on the staff and leadership side for our associations, MLSs, and our brokers as well. And just working together is going to be key.
Yeah, my parting message in our kind of closing session, our town hall of the event, was strongly oriented towards broader leadership capacity, and it does relate to our opportunities report that's coming out. I believe now is the time for brokerage leaders and organized real estate leaders, kind of 1 and 1A, to step forward and hold some organizations accountable that maybe haven't been holding up their end of the bargain, that haven't been as focused on their core competencies as they may have should have been. And so this moment, this opportunity in time, this urgency needs to be applied against data initiatives, but also broader leadership initiatives, and ensuring that the industry as a whole is holding itself accountable, and especially those entities that are in leadership roles. NAR can't overlook that, our own selves as leaders within our own organizations. But now is the time to maybe even make some tough decisions and pull back initially, so that we can push folks forward with greater urgency and an understanding of clarity of vision and purpose. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, with that, thank you all for sticking with us for an extended amount of time. For those that are with us as clients, we'll get this back out to you. We look forward to working with you. If we're not a client yet, reach out. We'd love to talk to you about creating your own data strategy and all these other concepts that came out of today. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. And again, our thoughts going out to all those folks on the southern portion of the U.S.
Thank you.